talk about cycling and people walking, actually what it really is to do with is it is about moving people and the sort of infrastructure that we have in place around that, and about how we approach our streets and the sort of changes that we think would be better.
We ran a piece of mandate earlier in the week about cycleways because Chris Boardman, who's obviously a huge figure within British cycling and is currently a commissioner for cycling and walking in Manchester, his comment was that these cycle lanes, such as we have on Peel Road, where they're just at the side of the road and then there's a traffic car lane right next to it, are a waste of time.
Well, I think it's really important to have the sort of advocacy that we have from the cycling ambassadors and all the other groups and all the other places to sort of really kind of champion and challenge on what is needed. And every place will have different needs. So the current projects that are being undertaken, and that actually wouldn't, and it's important to remember that the Peel Road project was something that happened perhaps when active travel was not so much on the agenda in terms of the connectivity and all the different options that there is to cycle design. So the current projects will be designed to the Sustrans design guidance, and that Sustrans are a charity and advocacy group and specialists in cycleway design. So that's really where we're taking the lead in terms of the plans that we have for active travel here. But the important thing is that we do need an Isle of Man solution, and that different sorts of lanes, whether they're segregated, whether they are off-road completely, which is actually the ideal, different approaches are appropriate for different streets, depending on speeds, depending on traffic flows. And where you do have a painted cycle line, there can also be chance and opportunities for other forms of segregation in that will mean that people can have more confidence in going out to the roads. And that's it. It should not just be for people that are feeling bold and brave and approaching cycling in a sporting point of view. So we will be looking at what the appropriate solutions are.
With the benefit of hindsight, Peel Road would have been done completely differently, wouldn't it? You've got a massive area of pavement on the left-hand side if you're coming into Douglas, and then there's a cycle lane and no barrier. So there's loads of room, isn't there, to have the separation? I
think for me, and I go along there, it does give me comfort to feel that there is a designated space that it's quite clearly marked out. I think sense of place is really important in all of this, and it shouldn't be just that it feels that cars are the dominant factor always on the roads. So for me, it's good to have that sense of space. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The point is about our streets and our towns and our villages is that over time and historically they have been designed with cars being at the forefront of that.
And there will be areas where you can't come up with a solution, but because it's too narrow, you think about somewhere like York, it's a medieval city, you can't do anything about it.
Well, Edinburgh have very narrow streets as well, and they have found solutions, and some of those solutions in smaller narrow places will be about shared space, and that is one of the options in a mix to create an overall network. The other important part of it is where the opportunities can be taken, for example, with old railway lines, is to be able to create fully off-road routes. And there is you can tell people behave differently. It's a completely different experience. So to going along the roads, and it's so much more pleasant to have the off-road routes. But we're going to need, a mix of all of these things, and to address what sort of place, environment we want on our streets.
Is it going to be the case that when big road projects looked at in the future, that it's not going to be just about cars, it's got to be about cyclists, about pedestrians, about everything else?
Yeah, it has to be about moving people, and it can't just be that it's only taking account of moving vehicles. So that is something that will be integrated into the entire approach of highways, based on the sorts of inputs that we are lucky to have and the training that's been gained from Sustrans to come out with the best approach, which is about moving people, about everyday journeys, and not just kind of only some people feeling that they have the confidence to get on bikes. It should be that people feel that they can move around the streets and get from A to B with realistic choices, walking and cycling, no matter their age, no matter any, it should be a realistic choice for everybody. And that's what we've seen elsewhere in the world. And those are the sort of approaches that we need to be inspired by.
Just finally, Rob Holden, who's of course quite outspoken on the subject. He is an ex-professional cyclist, so he knows what cyclists need. He says that there needs to be a change of culture.
Yes, I agree.
A change to the them and us.
I agree.
Situation.
Completely. Absolutely agree. And I really do welcome the advocacy that's come from the Isle of Man cycling. And I know that I've spoken to lots of people, and they've also spoken to the highways.
You share
and
that frustration.
I do, because it's we need to get past this as an island, and it's been something that elsewhere there have been challenges on. So even those countries,
a life's more important than a vendetta, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
at the end of the day, it's a silly attitude to have from both sides, isn't it?
It's a mindset that we need to get out of. But the point is that you need to have the quality level of infrastructure that will help break it down. To help break it down. And it's not just about cyclists versus drivers. It's also about walking and about moving people. So in other countries, they've had these challenges, and they've pushed through the resistance, and they've got people on board in terms of, you know, businesses, people who otherwise may not have cycled. So even for the countries that you think have had this nailed for a long time, there has been a lot of work and a lot of coming together to really create the sorts of safe spaces, safer streets, living streets. Even talking in the UK, and what they're doing is they're creating concepts of mini Hollands, and they are taking successful approaches elsewhere to really improve the lives and the environment and the infrastructure and just our entire way that we respond to our streets. And that's really what needs to happen here.